My husband didn't invite me to the wedding, but he used my credit card to pay for it, and the bank called me during the reception to ask why I was spending $30,000 on a ballroom I'd never seen. I'm Maren Whitlock, 41, and for 9 years I believed I had the kind of marriage other women envied. I earned the steady paycheck. I co-signed his loans. I paid down his debt and called it teamwork because that's what a wife does. So when the bank read me the charges one by one, the florist, the catering, the jeweler, the wedding band, I laughed and said there had to be a mistake. My husband was away at a conference that weekend. But then the fraud agent asked if I wanted the name listed on the venue reservation. It was his. The reception was happening right now. And the second name on the marriage license wasn't mine. Who was the woman standing where I should have stood? How long had the man sharing my bed been planning to marry someone else on my money? And why, when I finally reached him that night, was he angry at me? I need to back up because none of this makes sense unless you understand who I was before that phone call. I was the kind of woman who color-coded her budget spreadsheet. Blue for bills, green for savings, yellow for anything fun, though the yellow column was always the smallest. I worked as a claims adjuster at an insurance firm downtown, the kind of job where you learn to spot a lie in someone's paperwork before they even finish telling it to you. 9 years of reading fraud for a living. 9 years of missing it in my own house. His name was Grant Halloway. I met him at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday when he offered to buy my drink because I'd forgotten my wallet in the car. Small thing, but it felt like the universe tapping me on the shoulder. He had this laugh that filled up a room, the kind that made strangers turn and smile without knowing why. He worked in sales, always chasing some deal that was going to change everything, and I loved that about him at first. The hunger, the hope. I told myself I was steady enough for both of us. We got married on a Saturday in October, under string lights in my parents' backyard, and I remember standing there thinking, I will never have to wonder if someone chose me. He chose me, in front of everyone. For the first few years, it was good. Not perfect, no marriages, but good. He struggled to keep a job for more than 18 months at a time. I never made him feel small for it. I picked up the slack. When his car got repossessed, I co-signed for a new one. When his credit card debt ballooned past $9,000, I consolidated it under my name because my score was clean and his wasn't. I told myself this was marriage. This was in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. I just didn't know poorer meant poorer in honesty too. About a year ago, something shifted. Small things first. He started working later. Then the weekend trips began. A sales conference in Austin, a training seminar in Denver, a client dinner that stretched into an overnight stay. I never questioned it because I trusted him the way you trust gravity. You don't wake up every morning testing whether the floor will hold you. You just walk on it. But floors crack quietly before they break. There was a night in March when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and a name flashed across the screen that I didn't recognize. Sienna. No last name, just a heart emoji next to it. I remember standing there with a dish towel in my hand, staring at that little pink heart, feeling something cold slide down the back of my neck. When I asked him about it later, he said, "Client. She's needy. Wants me available all the time. It's exhausting." He rolled his eyes like I was the one being ridiculous for even asking. I let it go. I told myself jealousy was beneath me. I told myself a lot of things that year. Then came the ring. I found the receipt in his jacket pocket while doing laundry. A jewelry store downtown. An amount that made my stomach drop. $8,200. My birthday was 5 months away. Our anniversary was even further. I remember standing in the laundry room holding that slip of paper like it might explode. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself he's planning something big. A vow renewal maybe. Something wonderful. I folded that receipt back into his pocket and I smiled through dinner that night, already imagining how surprised I'd act when the moment came. God, I was rehearsing gratitude for my own robbery. 2 weeks before everything broke, he told me he had a work trip to Chicago. A regional sales summit, for days, hotel already booked through the company. He packed a garment bag, something he never usually needed for a conference, and when I asked why he needed a suit that nice for a summit, he said, "There's an awards dinner. Corporate stuff. You know how it is." Kissed him goodbye at the door. I told him to drive safe. I had no idea I was helping a man pack for his own wedding. The days he was gone were quiet in a way that should have felt peaceful but instead felt hollow. Like a room after furniture's been moved out and you can't remember exactly what used to be there. I cleaned the house. I watched a show we usually watch together and paused it twice because it felt wrong to laugh alone. I told myself I was being dramatic. Marriages need space sometimes. 9 years and I still knew nothing. On the third night, a Friday, I was curled up on the couch finishing a report for work, a bowl of pasta going cold on the coffee table, when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick it up. Hi, is this Marin Holloway? This is Denise from the Fraud Prevention Department at First Meridian Bank. I'm calling to verify some recent activity on your account. Is this a good time? My stomach tightened, the way it does right before you know something is about to change your life and your body knows it before your brain catches up. I said yes, go ahead. I have several transactions here from this evening that triggered our system, she said. A payment to Rosewood Manor Events for $11,400. A payment to Bellamy Floral Design for $2,200. A payment to Chef Marcus Catering for $6,800. A deposit to Chapman Jewelers for $3,000. And a payment to a live band booking service, Encore Sounds, for $2,200. Can you confirm you authorized these charges? I actually laughed. I remember the sound coming out of me, sharp and confused, like my body didn't know what else to do with the information. There's some mistake, I said. My husband's out of town. He's at a conference in Chicago. I haven't made any purchases tonight. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that tells you the person on the other end already knows something you don't. Ma'am, Denise said carefully, these charges are being made right now in real time at a venue in Chicago. Would you like me to read you the name listed on the reservation contact? My mouth went dry. Yes. The reservation is under the name Grant Holloway. It says, she paused again, and I could hear paper shuffling on her end. It says wedding reception, party of 90. I sat completely still. The pasta on the table had gone cold and filmy, and somewhere outside a car alarm was going off, and none of it mattered because the floor I'd been walking on for 9 years had just opened up beneath me and I was falling through it in real time on the phone, with a stranger reading my life back to me like a stranger's grocery list. Say that again, I whispered. Wedding reception, she repeated gently, like she understood or was starting to. Ma'am, are you all right? I wasn't. I don't think I said anything for almost 10 seconds. Then something in me, that claims adjuster part, the part trained to keep her voice level while the world burns down around her, took over. I asked her to freeze the card immediately. I asked her to decline every further transaction. I asked her, very calmly, if she could tell me the name of the second person listed on any of the paperwork. She hesitated. I don't have access to a guest list, ma'am. Only the billing contact, which is your husband's name. But I do see a note here from the venue coordinator regarding the marriage license filing fee, processed 2 days ago at the county courthouse. There's a second name attached to that filing. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Tell me. Sienna Marsh. The heart emoji. The needy client. The $8,000 ring that was never, not once, going to be mine. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark living room for I don't know how long. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the clock in the hallway, my own heartbeat slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape a body it no longer trusted. I thought about calling my sister. I thought about screaming. Instead, I did something strange. I stood up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out the small fireproof lockbox where we kept our important documents, our passports, our marriage certificate. I don't know why I needed to see it, to touch the paper with both our names on it, like proof that I hadn't imagined 9 years of my own life. I was still holding that certificate in my hands, my thumb running over the gold-embossed seal, when my phone rang again. Grant's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring out into nothing, the way he'd let so many quiet warning signs ring out in my life without ever picking them up. But I answered. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know if there was some explanation, some impossible, wonderful explanation that would make all of this make sense. "Marin," he said, and his voice wasn't soft, wasn't scared, wasn't anything close to a man who'd just been caught. It was sharp, furious. "What did you do to the card? Everything just got declined. The caterer is refusing to bring out the last course. I have 90 people watching me argue with a bank teller on the phone. Fix it. Now." I sat there with the marriage certificate still in my lap, my wedding certificate, and I felt something in me go very still and very cold, the way water goes right before it turns to ice. "Grant," I said quietly. "Whose wedding is this?" Silence. A long, ugly silence, filled with the sound of distant music and laughter on his end of the line. Someone's celebration happening in the background of my own destruction. "You need to calm down," he finally said. "It's not what you think." The bank read me the marriage license filing, Grant. Sienna Marsh. Tell me I heard that wrong. Another silence. And then, instead of an apology, instead of the horror and shame I thought any decent human being would feel at being caught in the middle of committing bigamy on his own wife's stolen credit line, he said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life, the words that told me everything I needed to know about the man I had spent 9 years building a life with. "You always said what's mine is yours," he said, his voice low and hard. "I just figured it worked both ways." I didn't cry. I want you to understand that because it surprises people when I tell them. I didn't scream. I didn't sob. I didn't beg him to explain himself. Something in me had already left the room. I looked down at the marriage certificate in my lap, at my own name printed there in careful black ink, Marin Elise Whitlock, and I felt, for the first time in 9 years, completely and perfectly clear. "Enjoy your reception," I said, and I hung up the phone. I sat there in the dark for a long time after that. Long enough for the shock to wear thin and something else to settle underneath it, something heavier and colder. Because this wasn't just a betrayal of the heart. This was fraud. This was $30,000 of debt sitting under my name, my credit, my future, spent on a wedding I wasn't invited to, for a marriage that made mine, legally, a very complicated and very dangerous question mark. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know that the ring in his jacket pocket had never been meant for me. Not once. Not even as an afterthought. I didn't know that somewhere in that ballroom, a woman in a white dress was laughing and crying and believing she had just married a single man with a clean slate and an honest heart. I didn't know that she was about to become the second casualty of a lie I hadn't even finished discovering yet. All I knew, sitting alone in my living room at 11:40 at night, was that the man who promised to spend his life with me had instead spent my life without me. And somewhere between the bank's phone call and his voice going cold on the other end of the line, I understood that the real story wasn't the wedding I missed. It was the marriage I never actually had. Before I go further into that night, I need to say something directly to you, the person watching this. If this story is moving you even a little, do me one favor. My ex-husband told me once, back when I mentioned wanting to build something of my own outside of him, that I'd never make it to 5,000 subscribers on this channel. He laughed when he said it. So if you're still here with me, hit subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and let's prove him wrong together. Every single one of you watching is doing that for me right now. Thank you. Now let's go back to that house, and that silence, and everything that came after. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch until the sky outside turned that pale gray color it gets right before sunrise, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago, just staring at the wall. My mind kept replaying the sound of his voice. Not scared, not sorry, annoyed, like I was an inconvenience standing between him and his open bar. Around 6 in the morning, I finally made myself get up and shower, because I had learned a long time ago in my job that shock doesn't excuse you from your responsibilities. If anything, it demands more of you. I had a fraud case sitting on my hands, except this time I wasn't the adjuster. I was the file. The bank called back at 8:15. It was Denise again, the same fraud agent from the night before, except her voice had changed. It was gentler now, the careful tone people use when they already know they're about to hand you something heavy. "Mrs. Halloway," she said, and I almost corrected her, almost said don't call me that, but I let it go. "I want to walk you through what we found overnight. This is bigger than a few declined charges." She told me the spending hadn't started that week. It had started 4 months earlier. Small amounts first, $30 here, $120 there. Things I would have dismissed as gas or lunch if I'd even noticed them on the statement, because I trusted him enough to stop double-checking years ago. Then the amounts grew. A $400 deposit to a florist in March. A $600 deposit to a photography studio in April. A dress boutique charge in June that I actually remembered seeing and asking him about, and he told me it was a client gift, some corporate thing, nothing to worry about. For months, he had been building someone else's wedding, receipt by receipt, inside my own bank statement, for 4 months, and I had signed off on every one of them without knowing it, because I trusted the man reading them out to me. There's something else, Denise said, and I could hear her hesitating. The sound of someone choosing words carefully because she knew they were about to detonate. The marriage license filing 2 days ago. I did some digging on our end because a case like this needs to be flagged to our legal fraud unit regardless of your wishes. Mrs. Halloway, are you and Mr. Halloway currently, or have you ever been, legally divorced? No, I said. We're still married. We've been married 9 years. The silence on her end told me what she was about to say before she said it. Then I need to inform you that what occurred last night may constitute bigamy on his part, which is a criminal offense in this state, separate from the financial fraud charges we're already pursuing for unauthorized use of your account. I'd strongly recommend you speak with an attorney today, and I'd also recommend you file a police report regarding the fraudulent charges. I can provide you with a case number and a referral to our fraud investigation team. I wrote everything down with a hand that had finally, blessedly, stopped shaking. Something about hearing an official word for what he'd done, bigamy, fraud, criminal, steadied me in a strange way. It wasn't just my heart that had been broken. It was the law. And the law, unlike Grant, doesn't care how charming your laugh is. I called a lawyer that morning, a woman named Priya Okafor who specialized in family law with a side of financial fraud recovery, which apparently was a niche that existed because enough women like me needed her. When I told her the story, she didn't gasp or act shocked. She just said, very calmly, "Okay, let's build your file. Do you have access to online banking? I want every statement for the last 12 months by end of day." I spent that entire Saturday at my kitchen table with my laptop open, highlighting charges in yellow, cross-referencing them against a calendar of every single work trip and late-night Grant had given me over the past year. It was like reading a novel I'd been living inside without realizing there was another character in every chapter. A florist charge the same week he said he had a headache and skipped my cousin's birthday dinner. A hotel charge in a city he told me he'd never actually visited. A jewelry deposit the exact week he told me business was slow and we needed to cut back on groceries. Cut back on groceries. I remember sitting there with that thought circling in my chest like something sharp. He'd told me to buy the store-brand pasta because money was tight, while paying deposits on an $8,000 ring for someone else. By Sunday afternoon, the story wasn't just mine anymore. It became hers too. Her name showed up in my phone around 2 in the afternoon. A number I didn't recognize, and something told me not to ignore it this time either. I answered, and a woman's voice came through, shaky, thin, like she'd been crying for a long time and had just barely pulled herself together enough to make the call. "Is this Marin?" she asked. My name is Sienna. Sienna Marsh. I think you know who I am." My whole body went rigid. Every part of me wanted to hang up, to scream at her, to demand to know how she could stand at an altar with a married man and smile for photographs. But something in her voice stopped me. It didn't sound like the voice of a woman who knew she'd done something wrong. It sounded like the voice of a woman who had just found out she'd been drowning the whole time and hadn't known it. "I know who you are," I said carefully. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me, even though I know you have every reason not to." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know he was married. I swear to God, I didn't know. He told me his first marriage ended 2 years ago. He said the divorce was finalized, that his ex-wife kept the house and he just wanted a fresh start. He showed me paperwork, Marin. I saw paperwork with his name on it. My stomach turned. What paperwork? Divorce documents. Filed in another state, he said, because that's where the marriage happened. I never had a reason to question it. Why would I? We met at his gym 8 months ago. He told me about his ex-wife maybe twice, always briefly, always like it hurt too much to talk about. I sat there gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Listening to this woman describe a version of Grant Holloway I recognized in some details and didn't recognize at all in others. The charm, the easy laugh, the way he made you feel like the only person who mattered while quietly making sure you never asked the wrong question. "He told me you cheated on him," she said quietly, and I heard her voice break again. "He said you left him for someone at your work, that you'd been distant for years, that he'd been alone in that marriage a long time before it ended. I'm so sorry. I believed him. I feel so stupid saying that out loud." I closed my eyes. 9 years of co-signing his debts, covering his slow months, defending him to my own family when they gently questioned why he could never seem to hold a job, and this was the story he'd built to excuse marrying someone else on my money. I was the villain in his fairy tale, the cold wife, the cheater, the reason he deserved a second chance at love. "I never cheated on him," I said, my voice steady even though something inside me was breaking apart piece by piece. "We are still legally married, Sienna. There was no divorce. There's no paperwork because none was ever filed. Whatever he showed you was fake." The sound she made on the other end of that call is something I don't think I'll ever forget. A kind of gasping, wounded sound, like all the air had left her body at once. "The venue," she whispered. "The florist. The band. My dress." He told me his savings covered all of it, that he'd been putting money away for years for exactly this. "Maren, are you telling me?" "Every charge came out of an account with my name on it," I said. "The reception you had last night, the dress you wore, the ring on your finger. All of it. Every dollar." She didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear her crying softly, and strangely, some small part of me that I didn't expect to find inside all that anger felt sorry for her. She wasn't my enemy. She was the second woman he'd lied to in order to steal from the first. 2 women, 1 man, one long con that had probably been running since long before either of us fully understood what we were standing inside of. "I want to help however I can," she finally said. "I'll give statements. I'll hand over anything, texts, emails, the paperwork he showed me. I have receipts from things he had me pay for too. Things he said he'd pay me back for and never did. Maren, I don't think I'm the only one he's done this to. There were things he said, places he mentioned, an ex before you he called Renata, and something about him not liking to talk about his past. I thought it was because he'd been hurt. Now I'm wondering if it's because there's a pattern." That word, pattern, sat heavy in my chest for the rest of that day. Because if it was true, if there were other women, other marriages or almost marriages, other bank accounts quietly bled dry behind a wall of charm and excuses, then this wasn't a man who made one catastrophic mistake in a moment of weakness. This was a man with a method, and I had just become his most expensive chapter yet. I called Priya back that evening and told her everything Sienna had shared. She went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet lawyers go when they're recalculating the size of a case in real time. "Maren," she said slowly, "I need you to prepare yourself. If there's a pattern of this behavior involving other women or other instances of fraud, this stops being a private matter between you and your husband. This becomes a criminal case that could involve multiple victims, and you, as his legal wife with financial ties to every account he's touched, are going to be at the center of untangling it. I know that's a lot, but I also think it means you have more support coming than you realize. You are not going to be the only person telling this story to a judge." That night, I sat alone in the house we'd bought together 6 years earlier, a house with my name on the mortgage and his on the mailbox, and I thought about all the women who might be sitting in rooms just like mine, holding phones just like mine, discovering that the man who once made them feel chosen had only ever been choosing himself. Around 10 that night, my phone buzzed one more time. A text this time, not a call. From Grant. "You're overreacting. This can all be fixed quietly if you just calm down and stop talking to lawyers. I still love you. This doesn't have to destroy everything we built." I read it twice, then a third time, searching for even a flicker of the fear or shame a decent person would feel after being caught doing what he'd done. There wasn't any. Just the same old confidence, the same old certainty that if he said the right words in the right tone, I would fold the way I always had. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop, created a folder, and began labeling every piece of evidence I'd gathered that day: bank statements, the recorded call with Denise, Sienna's number, and the notes from our conversation, the highlighted calendar of lies stretching back 4 months. I named the folder simply Truth, because for the first time in 9 years, I finally had it. All of it. And nothing he texted me that night or any night after was going to talk me out of using it. The next 3 weeks moved like a slow-building storm, the kind where you can feel the pressure changing in the air before the first drop of rain even falls. Priya filed the initial fraud complaint that Monday morning, and within days the case stopped being something quiet between me, a bank, and a broken marriage. It became a file with a number on it, sitting on a detective's desk in the Financial Crimes Unit, and that detective's name was Roland Aguilar. Detective Aguilar called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was still at work, sitting in my little gray cubicle surrounded by other people's insurance claims. Other people's disasters that I was paid to sort through and make sense of. It felt strange, almost funny in a bitter way, that I now needed someone else to do the same thing for mine. "Mrs. Halloway," he said, "I want to walk you through where we are. This is bigger than we initially thought." He told me they'd traced Grant's financial activity back almost 3 years. Not 4 months like I'd assumed. 3 years of small, careful movements. A separate post office box registered under a name that was almost his but not quite, Grant Holloway instead of Halloway, 1 letter changed, enough to create just a sliver of distance between his real identity and the one he used for certain transactions. A prepaid phone. A second email address that Sienna had unknowingly been messaging the entire length of their relationship. And then he told me the part that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "There was another woman before Sienna," Aguilar said. "A woman named Renata Cole, in another state. Public records show Mr. Halloway filed a marriage license with her 4 years ago. That marriage was never dissolved either. Mrs. Halloway, based on what we're finding, it appears you may not be his only current legal wife." I sat completely still in my cubicle, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the gray fabric wall of my little office box like it might give me an answer. 4 years ago. That was 2 years into my own marriage with him. 2 years in, while I was covering his car payments and defending him to my mother, he had been married to another woman in another state, and neither of us had ever known the other existed. "Is he a bigamist 3 times over?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, flat and far away. "That's what we're determining," Aguilar said carefully. "What I can tell you is that this has moved from a financial fraud case into something significantly larger. We believe Mr. Halloway has been running parallel relationships for financial gain for at least 6 years, possibly longer. You, Ms. Marsh, and Ms. Cole all appear to have unknowingly funded different chapters of the same pattern. I called Renata that night. It felt like the strangest phone call of my life. Dialing a stranger's number to ask her if the man she thought she'd married had also been married to me the whole time. She answered on the second ring, and when I explained who I was, there was a long, heavy silence, and then she said something I will never forget. "I always knew something was off," she said quietly. "He used to disappear for days and call it work. I found charges I couldn't explain, but every time I asked, he made me feel crazy for asking. I stopped asking after a while. It was easier. 3 women, 3 bank accounts, 3 hearts, 3 sets of savings quietly bled out over years by a man who had built an entire life out of convincing each of us we were the only one holding the truth." Renata's marriage had ended in what she thought was a mutual, quiet divorce 2 years earlier, except investigators later found no record of any divorce filing at all. Legally, on paper, in the eyes of the state, Grant Halloway may have been married to all 3 of us at once, at different points, overlapping in ways none of us had ever imagined possible. When detectives finally arrested him, it wasn't dramatic the way you'd picture in a movie. There were no sirens outside a mansion, no dramatic chase. He was picked up quietly at Sienna's apartment on a Thursday morning, still in his pajamas, still pretending, according to the officer who called to update me, that this was all some enormous misunderstanding that would sort itself out if everyone just calmed down. I didn't go to the arraignment. I couldn't make myself sit in a room and look at his face. Not yet. But Priya went, and she called me afterward with an update that made me sit down on my kitchen floor and just breathe for a while. Combined charges of financial fraud, identity misuse, and bigamy across 2 states. Full restitution ordered pending the investigation's completion. A criminal case that, because of the scope of what he'd done, was picking up local news coverage, which meant more women were starting to come forward, some who'd dated him briefly and noticed strange financial requests, some who'd simply had a bad feeling they'd never been able to name. The credit card fraud alone, once fully tallied across every account he'd touched using my name, came to just over $31,000. The bank's fraud department worked with Priya to have every unauthorized charge reversed and my credit fully restored, a process that took months of paperwork, phone calls, and waiting, but that ended, eventually, with my name clean again. Clean in a way that felt almost strange after everything, like scrubbing a stain out of fabric so thoroughly that you forget, for a moment it was ever there. Sienna's wedding, the one my money paid for, was legally annulled within weeks, since it turned out Grant had never actually been free to marry her in the first place. She sent me a card in the mail about 2 months after everything broke. No return address, just her handwriting on the front. Inside, she'd written 4 lines. "I'm sorry for what you lost because of me, even though neither of us chose this. I hope you find peace. I'm trying to find mine too. If you ever want to talk, my door is open." I kept that card in the drawer of my nightstand for a long time. I never called her, not out of anger, but because I think we both needed to heal separately before we could ever sit across from each other without the weight of him between us. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't get talked about enough, and I lived inside it for months after the arrest. It isn't the grief of losing someone you love. It's the grief of realizing the person you loved never fully existed in the first place. The man who held my hand during my father's funeral, who learned to make my mother's recipe for chicken and dumplings because I missed it after she passed, who used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror on hard mornings that just said, "You've got this." I had to sit with the fact that all of that tenderness had existed inside the same man who was quietly building 2 other lives on my money while I slept beside him at night. Both things were true. He was capable of real gentleness and real cruelty, sometimes in the very same week. That contradiction was the hardest part to carry, harder even than the money, harder than the public shame of it all. I started seeing a therapist that winter, a quiet, steady woman named Dr. Whitfield who never once told me how to feel, only asked me questions that helped me find my own answers. One afternoon, months into our sessions, she asked me something that cracked something open in my chest. She asked, "What did trusting him give you, before you knew any of this? What did you love about who you were inside that marriage?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I told her I loved being someone's safe place. I loved being depended on. I loved the version of myself that could hold everything together while everyone else fell apart around me. And she said, very gently, "That's a beautiful thing to be for people who deserve it. The work now isn't learning to trust less. It's learning to ask sooner whether the people you're being strong for are being honest with you in return." That sentence sat with me for a long, long time. By spring, the legal case had mostly resolved. Grant took a plea deal rather than risk trial, given the strength of the evidence stacked against him from 3 different women's financial records, texts, and testimonies. He was sentenced to time that felt, honestly, both too short and strangely irrelevant to me by that point, because the sentence that mattered most to me wasn't the one a judge handed down. It was the one I handed myself, the decision to stop being someone's safety net when I had never once been offered the same in return. I sold the house that spring. It hurt in a way I didn't expect, standing in the empty living room on the last day, looking at the faint outline on the wall where our wedding picture had hung for 6 years before I finally took it down. But I also felt something lighter underneath the sadness, something that felt almost like relief. I used part of the restitution money, once it finally came through, as a down payment on a small condo near the water, nothing fancy, just mine. The first night I slept there, I remember lying in bed listening to a silence that used to scare me and realizing, for the first time in a long time, that it didn't feel empty anymore. Felt like peace. I went back to work fully that summer, and something shifted there too. My manager, who'd quietly watched me hold myself together through months of court dates and paperwork without ever once missing a deadline, pulled me aside and told me the company wanted to move me into a senior investigator role, specifically handling complex fraud claims. There was a strange, almost poetic justice in that. The woman who spent 9 years missing the fraud happening in her own living room was now being trusted to spot it for a living, professionally, permanently, for other people who needed someone sharp enough to see what she once couldn't. I started this channel not long after that, actually, in a spare hour here and there, mostly because writing everything down helped me make sense of it, and because somewhere along the way I realized other women were living inside versions of the same story, quietly, without anyone believing them yet. Grant used to tell me, back when I first mentioned wanting to build something like this, that no one would care enough to listen, that I'd never make it past a few hundred subscribers talking about my own life like it mattered to strangers. I think about that sometimes, when I see the numbers climb a little higher each week. I think about it every single time one of you comments that this story reminded you of something you lived through too. I don't hate Grant anymore. Not the way I did in those first raw months. Hate takes a strange kind of energy to hold on to, and I've decided to spend my energy differently now. But I also haven't forgiven him in the way people sometimes expect, the quiet, tidy forgiveness that wraps a story up in a bow. I've simply set it down. I carry the lesson instead of the wound. I carry the woman I became instead of the marriage I lost. Renata and I still talk sometimes, actually. Strange as it sounds, we've become something like friends. Two women who found each other through the worst discovery of our lives, and somehow built something honest out of it. Sienna and I exchanged a few messages last winter, careful and kind. Both of us still healing separately. Both of us, I think, finally starting to trust our own judgment again instead of someone else's charm. If there's one thing I'd want you to carry with you from everything I've shared, it's this. The version of yourself that gives endlessly, that holds everything together, that never asks for the same honesty it offers. That version of you deserves to be loved by someone who isn't quietly spending you down to nothing while you're busy being strong for them. So I want to leave you with a question tonight, one I still ask myself even now. How many of us mistake being needed for being truly loved? And how long would it take us to notice the difference, if the person we trusted most was the one keeping us from ever finding out?